How can design and branding create a world where a fair trade lemonade brand can rival a company like Coca-Cola? How will you get people on board with your idea, products, or service for change? Building a brand is complex and overwhelming, and even more so when you are building it to make a difference in the world. That's why so many change makers leave the brand for last. But hoping a product will magically solve itself is the worst brand strategy ever. How can we open up world-class knowledge on building brands to advance social justice and environmental action? Packaging design should seduce, inform, and even save the planet. I'm BRANDERMAN, and this is BRANDERMAN, the podcast where I talk with experts to uncover what it actually takes to make a positive impact on consumers, the market, and society. Warning: keep this podcast out of the reach of close-minded marketers and designers. Before the interview, let me introduce my design agency.
Brands with purpose. Human, agile, honest brands that leave no one indifferent. BrandThechange creates and revitalizes brands to imagine and shape the future. BrandThechange, the branding and packaging design agency for bold brands.
Today I had the pleasure to speak with Miltenburg, a Dutch brand developer who had dedicated her career leveraging the power of brand to advance ideas, products and services for social and environmental change. After a storied career as a designer, strategist and creative director at world-renowned agencies, Anne left the agency world to found BrandThechange, an educational organization that trains changemakers in brand thinking skills from Nairobi, Kenya. In this episode, she tells me why she decided to found an educational company instead of an agency to address branding for social change. She also explains why we should separate purpose marketing from purpose-led brands. Anne also shares what has living in Africa taught her about branding and design. Today, with me, Anne Miltenburg. And each of us is a container of ideas, projects, and dreams. However, we can't read the label when we are inside the jar. What do you think your label says, or what would you like it to say?
Great question for someone in branding, because I think all day about what's on other people's bottles on the outside. I mean, if I didn't have an answer for myself, I'd be in pretty bad shape. So my professional answer would definitely be that I'm a brand developer who leverages the power of brand to advance social and environmental change. And as a person, my bottle would say, Anne Miltenburg, aspiring monotasker. I would just love to be the kind of person who would do one thing at a time, but I'm always doing 40 things and tiring myself out in the process. But at the same time, that's also what gives me, inspiration and energy.
Building a brand is like a journey. It starts with defining where we are and asking ourselves where we want to go. What was the path that led you from studying graphic design in the Netherlands to growing from designer to strategist for commercial clients inside Dutch agencies, to founding BrandThechange in Nairobi and now focusing in branding for social change?
I like the way that you frame that. So I'll take you back to my childhood, but it won't make it too long. I always was an idealistic child, and I was writing school reports on apartheid and women's rights. And this was just really kind of the fabric of our everyday life. In the 1980s, my mom would practice something that she would call like wallet consumer activism. So through her wallet, she would decide what causes she would support or not. So she would boycott the African products at the time, or make sure we didn't buy the chewing gum with the plastic strip in it. When I got older, I did realize that if that was something that I wanted to take into my professional life, and I also had a big passion for design and all kinds of creativity. And I thought that combining those both would be interesting. And in the Netherlands, where I was born and raised, graphic design is very much rooted in public culture. thought that becoming a graphic designer was a great way of putting some of that social engagement in action. I was really lucky to be accepted at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in The Hague, even though it's a very vocational training. So, you're still learning to draw by hand. And we have one of the world's most famous typographic departments there. And so you're just drawing letters years and years by hand to really master the craft. But there was also a really important intellectual component, and the faculty really let you follow your own passion. So I was able to take that idea of social engagement really into my studies, and was at that point in my life very interested in movements like Naomi Klein's No Logo and the First Things First manifesto that came out in 1964 for the first time, and later was released in my first year of studies in 2000 again. One thing that bothered me about the aspect of social engagement within graphic design, that the leading idea was to keep your hands clean. So you shouldn't work for evil companies. And it was quite dogmatic. I thought, well, all of this work really comes from a place of weakness and criticism rather than a place of strength. Yeah, I felt like I wanted to be part of a solution. And so I'd long been interested in the HIV/AIDS crisis because I have a cousin who is HIV positive. And I found some early research on this concept of visual illiteracy. And visual literacy is something that people experience who haven't been trained to read imagery. So if you were born somewhere in the middle of the Sahara and you've never seen a drawing or a photograph, you haven't been trained to dissect them. But what's interesting is that a lot of organizations working in global health, they use a lot of visual materials in their outreach campaign. So I thought that was an area that I thought was really interesting. It was more design thinking related. And so I went to Mali in Africa for 3 months to do research and prototyping. And that was for me really an eye-opening experience. I got very disillusioned with the development space. Actually, when I came back, I thought to myself, I will never again work in this space. And I was offered, so my graduation professor was Dumbar from Studio Dumbar.
Yeah.
And he said, why don't you come work at my branding agency? And I really took that opportunity with both hands because to me, and funny enough, the brand space felt like a morally very clear space because it was like you're selling stuff to people, you're making organizations look good. And not necessarily bad organization, but all kinds of different entrepreneurs. And I met people that I just absolutely loved, whether it was a big telecom company or an insurance company or a museum. And I really, really loved my work. But so first as a designer and then as a strategist and finally as a creative director at Interbrand. But I just missed that kind of social engagement that was so important in my private life. How could my profession actually help to get some of the amazing ideas for change into the world and be adopted by more people? Because I was seeing so many really, really good ideas in global health, in justice, in sustainability that were just not getting the type of attention that I felt they deserved. So I quit my job and took about a year to figure out what role could brand play. And what I noticed when I spoke to social entrepreneurs and all these different change makers is that what was holding them back from building stronger brands wasn't necessarily money, which I had initially thought. It was mostly that they didn't have the skills and they didn't have the knowledge. And no one had ever attempted to unpack what a stronger brand could mean for them and how they might build one. So that's how I ended up deciding that what I thought the world needed was an educational organization that really focused on unpacking the power of brand and leveraging it for social and environmental change. And on my travel that first year, I discovered Nairobi, which is really this incredible hub for social innovation and technology. And got my first client there, my second client, and decided this is the place where we need to be. Took a one-way ticket to Kenya, and I haven't moved back since. So it's been 7 years since that moment.
Why did you decide to found an education company instead of an agency to address branding for social change?
There are plenty of agencies out there. I don't think the world lacks agencies and consultants. What I think is really important in where we saw the gap was that you can't expect agencies to fix these things for the change makers and for the social entrepreneurs. the brand thinking skills really need to be embedded in an organization. In order to do that, you can't expect consultants and agencies to educate clients on that. It's a skill that the client should master even more than the people that they choose to execute with. You really need to own that process, and you can't own that process if you don't have the knowledge and skills. So that's why I decided to focus on building an education company. I was pretty confident in my teaching skills and supplemented that teaching activities with the creation of basic tools and knowledge resources like case studies of successful change-making brands to really ensure that instead of working with 6 clients a year, I could actually reach 600 people and help them make a difference in their practice. And so the first year that I started doing workshops and trainings, I think I worked with about 500 people. And then the next year we worked with 1,000 people. We're not guiding people from zero all the way to a brand with thousands of customers. But I think we are instilling really fundamental principles, and also started to get interest from other brand professionals in the space. So we trained 36 trainers all over the world. So brand professionals from Argentina, from the US, Canada, the Philippines, Kenya, to deliver the method that we had developed themselves. And so it just became this amazing collaboration across the globe of all these like-spirited people that all saw the potential of what a strong brand could do. If we want to change the trajectory of our planet, which of course, is looking pretty bleak right now.
Why do you try to demystify the branding process? Do you believe in do-it-yourself branding?
There's a lot of smoke and mirrors in the branding industry. There's a lot of difficult words and jargon. And in some cases, people really know what they're doing. But in my experience, very few people in the brand industry even really know what branding is and what the magic of that method actually entails. Many of us don't even agree on the definitions of certain terms that we use. And for instance, I was educated as a designer. I worked, on award-winning projects for really amazing clients, but I had not had any exposure, for instance, in brand strategy until a number of years into my career. And even then, working at Interbrand, you cannot expect someone who doesn't have an education in brand or who doesn't have a full-time practice as a brand lead inside a company or potentially at an agency to be able to develop those skills all on their own. But the mindset of thinking like a brand strategist can be taught. And brands are really created by the people who man them. They're not created by external people. You can work with the most wonderful creative team, but at the end of the day, a brand isn't just about the communication arm of the company. It is about how do I experience the product and what's the interaction with the team and what are the ethics that are guiding our decisions in supply chain and in partnerships. And that's just something that agencies can't touch. If entrepreneurs and changemakers are actually trained and they feel like they have the skills to develop a strong guiding perspective of brand on all their different activities, I think the world will be much better for it. And also the collaborations with people in the brand space will be much more rewarding because people who have been trained in these skills and who master them will make for better clients. My goal with our training is not to have someone who sits behind her desk and creates their own brand strategy and then goes on to create their own website and their own everything. My goal is to create people who understand what is the change that I want to see in the world and how can brand play a role in bringing the right people on board to make that change happen. And when people have that level of clarity, we can expect really amazing things. And whether, that entrepreneur is in the financial space or the health space, I think there is brand thinkers in all of us. Coming from the brand industry myself, I think that we often kind of, like little children who've worked really hard at their homework and don't want anyone else to benefit from it. And like we hold our arm a little bit against around the profession, like, yeah, but it's ours. Like, don't take this from us.
You mentioned your brand thinking Canvas, which is a key tool in your book. Could you tell a little bit more about what this canvas does and how you can use it?
The canvas really is the result of like 13 years of frustration and challenges that we experienced with clients. In the early 2000s, when I just started working at agencies, I think the hype of Apple was really at its peak. And every client who walked in the door wanted to be like Apple, but no one really knew what it took to be Steve Jobs. And we experience brands through interactions on the outside, but we don't always understand what are the principles behind it. It was really hard for us to help the client understand how do you actually define those driving principles. So in the course of 13 years, I spent time drawing different models, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears of like, how do we bridge this divide between strategy and design? And how do we actually expand the mandate of brand beyond just the communication channels? When I started to do these trainings and workshops for BrandThechange, I thought we need one good model for what's truly the anatomy of a brand. So that's when the 3-circle model ended up appearing on my sketch pad, and realized like we first need to help people define a strong brand core, and that then defines what is the visual and the verbal expression that brings that identity or brings that core to life. And how do you then use that to generate products and services that reflect that brand, to define where you need to be seen, what are the places where your brand best comes to life, what are the events that you need to develop or be a part of, how does the core of the brand, so the vision and the mission and the values and the purpose and what you're committing to deliver, how does it actually translate to communications and channels? So yes, I know that you can open a Twitter account, but what are you going to do there? What are you going to say? How are you going to connect to people? What kind of partnerships are you going to build? How is your brand core going to actually influence our policy, or what is the behavior of your people, et cetera? So I really wanted to give people an idea of this holistic perspective on brand. And to this day, I think, I'm surprised by how well the tool works and how many amazing statements we get from people who've worked with it.
BrandThechange brings together change makers and brand professionals from all over the world who want to learn how to harness the power of brand for their mission. What is the most difficult part of being a brand strategist serving change makers and corporate troublemakers?
Well, I would say everything is a trade-off, which is kind of like the sticker on my forehead. When you're on the corporate side, you might think that working for change makers sounds like incredibly rewarding. The most important difference is that there's a lot at stake. So you work with people who are trying to solve really complex challenges on really, really tight budgets. So the only competitive advantage that you have is that you can be smarter. And that's really tough. So you have to work twice as hard, be twice as smart, and twice as quick, preferably, because it's urgent that we solve this, and you need to do so with fewer resources.
There is a huge trend towards larger corporations reframing their strategies to have more purpose. Is that good news or just brand washing?
Well, it's good news if they walk the talk. I am very conflicted about this topic, and it's something we've spoken about within the BrandThechange community for years. I don't think there is one answer. Overall, there has been a huge trend on purpose for about 10 years. That trend has been based on anecdotal evidence, success of companies like Tom Shoes and Patagonia, but also Unilever. Some of the research that actually says that being purpose-driven has better results than being non-purpose-driven, that evidence to me is pretty shoddy. The problem with the washing is not necessarily that you're lying. Like, okay, well, people lie about a lot of stuff. They tell you that their cream removes your wrinkles when it doesn't. So I'm not surprised that you'll then also say, like, this is great for the world when it's not. But the problem that this creates with the greenwashing, the woke washing, whatever washing, is that people feel like this problem is being attended to. And when we think that someone is putting out a fire, then we don't go rushing to it ourselves. And when we think that corporations are actually turning around and cleaning up their act while they are not, that is posing a huge issue for society at large, because it means that citizens are going to put less pressure on their government to take action. And it also means that citizens no longer expect this kind of change to come through policy change and through voter activism, but they expect this to come through companies and commerce. At the other end of the spectrum, I feel like, wow, look at the immense amount of pressure that consumers have put inside companies that are just expected to now be more sustainable and to change their ways. So I'm of two minds. I'm both quite critical and quite cheerleading about the development. And maybe one day I'll choose a definite side, but I'm on the fence about it.
Perfect. And you know that our podcast is focused on package design. I would like to ask you, what is the biggest mistake you see purpose-led brands make when designing their brands and packaging?
Well, yeah, I guess the worst crimes for me in packaging are crimes of waste. And I was having a cup of tea at a cafe a while ago, and, I live in Kenya and I live in the countryside. So I'm not at all up to date on the latest in packaging and the latest in, because we're not exposed to that much here. But you go to Europe or the US and now you're in full-on blown brand space. And so I was having a cup of tea and the waiter comes up with this huge wooden chest with a big brand name on it and all about wellness and mindfulness and earth this and earth that. And then inside the box were other boxes with flavors, and each box had a little cardboard book. And then you had to open each little book. And then inside the book was a tea bag and a plastic bag. And then you open that plastic bag and then came out a little tea bag with a string and a tag with a wonderful quote about the beauty of the world. And I just, I can't. I just want to scream. And I just don't know, did this person miss the news? Who proposed it and who said yes to this? It's just absolutely unbelievable that there are people who can put this out into the world without any alarm bells ringing about the extreme extravagance in resources that we're currently deploying in areas like packaging and consumer culture, and that there's apparently someone who still thinks this is okay. And then I look at the little quote about wellness and happiness on the tea label, and I just try to take a breath like they're advising me to, and then I get even more upset.
What has living in Africa taught you about branding and design?
Africa is a huge continent, right? I've only covered a very, very modest piece of the continent, but there are incredible developments here in terms of technology and how people interact with brands. There's very direct relationships because technology and smartphones, they're jumping in a way over this very old school landscape of print and billboards and all of that. So it's really taught me to embrace technology. Whereas in the West, I think we are quite nostalgic, especially Northern Europe. We're still kind of we like to be on our cell phone, but if you're studying design, you are still thinking posters and you are still thinking books. And here, there's none of that nostalgia. And so people are just far more willing to be experimental in the media they use. And I really love that. So that's definitely been very refreshing for me. And because there isn't a, let's say, cultural aesthetic or a cultural history of a certain style or design, people are really experimental in that sense as well. It results in very different things. There's very few people here who you would ever hear say a brand is a logo. People are all thinking about a brand is reputation, a brand is identity, a brand means engagement and community. People here are advanced, and that's very helpful.
Wow. What do you think are those 2 or 3 concepts or ideas that most clients or designers have deeply rooted in our heads and that we should think about erasing completely in a short period of time?
There's this very persistent dysfunctional belief that brand and marketing are overhead in the world of social and environmental change. So people have this belief that money that we spend on brand and marketing is not money that's going towards the cause, and therefore it's wasted. That is such a dysfunctional belief, because if you are not reaching people, if you're not engaging them, if you are not building a long-term relationship with them, if they're not loving you and recommending you to others, then you are not making a difference to begin with. The brand serves to create the impact. And that's something that is just incredibly blocking for people to really scale that change that they want to see. The second misconception is that brand development is this thing you do when your product or service is done. You do it once and then you're ready. What we see where people really succeed is if instead they think about brand development and marketing as a process that runs in parallel to product development process and is very iterative. So as you're developing your product, you're talking to potential customers, what are your problems? What are your needs? How can we make it better? And that's all information that you need for the brand development, right? And so if you create this iterative process where brand and product development are really intertwined, you just get much better results. Involving customers early on, involving creatives or other people who are going to be, whether they're inside your team or outside, who are going to be involved in that brand building, I think it's just really key.
Yeah. What changes do you think we will see in the coming years in the world of purpose-led brands and their design?
There's going to be a huge pushback on this world of purpose and purpose marketing. People are becoming ever more critical of companies that are not walking their talk. Governments will put in place regulations. So in the UK, there's already an agency that is now investigating green claims of advertising. There is a green claims code so that you are no longer just allowed to make, random green claims as a company. There'll be a bit of a cooling down on the storytelling ideas. People are tired of anecdotes and stories. People are just going to want to see the hard data. A lot more transparency. Hopefully, companies that are now thinking about jumping on the bandwagon of purpose are going to see that the stakes are high and people are watching. And hopefully that will enable those companies to do better and for all of us to benefit from that.
Yeah. What is your next adventure? Besides living in a farm in Kenya and moving to Africa?
Well, yeah, so that's been a long time now. So that adventure has kind of turned into everyday life, I guess. Yeah, so after seeing a lot of adventure in life 7 years ago, what ended up happening is I started sowing a lot of seeds, and now we're harvesting some of that. We started an online community in 2015. And that community has really grown. And what we're now doing is we're really ramping up our efforts in creating really good community-led learning experiences around building brands for change, where together with this group that we formed online, it's accessible to everyone, by the way. We come together, we define what we want to learn about brand and creating social change and work on these topics together. And that is an adventure because it's a total experiment in that sense. Besides BrandThechange, I'm involved as an independent consultant for several African impact brands. And for one of these brands that has been very successful in creating behavior change, I have an opportunity to guide a team of researchers in uncovering what elements of the brand actually contribute most to behavior change. And that's very exciting because what I really want most of all is to have independent third-party research. So not by PR agencies or brand agencies who say build a brand and it'll make a difference, but independent researchers with academic background who come in and take apart every element of the brand and find out why has brand building made a difference in this particular area. Working with academics will be one way for me to leverage their knowledge of really good independent research with my knowledge of the practice, and hopefully being able to open up that knowledge to the rest of the world.
And thanks for this fantastic conversation. Thanks for democratizing knowledge, because I think that's in your soul. Thanks for being a branding troublemaker.
Thank you, Hernan. Thank you so much. Really wonderful conversation.
I hope you have enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. You can check the episode notes for all the relevant links. I also invite you to follow me on Instagram and on my website, branderman.design. Follow the podcast in your favorite app so you don't miss the next episode of BRANDERMAN, the podcast where we try to uncover how to make a positive impact on consumers, the market, and society through package design.